Welcome to the 700 Club. The federal government wants to crack down on the unvaccinated. President Biden announced sweeping new vaccine mandates yesterday. They affect not only federal employees, but also those working in private business and school children.
Well, the president's new mandates quickly generated pushback, with Republicans calling them unconstitutional and some states considering legal action. Caitlin Burke has the details.
These sweeping new mandates are expected to affect as many as 100 million Americans. The new rules requiring vaccinations not only for federal employees and any contractors who work for the federal government, but also private businesses.
The Department of Labor is developing an emergency rule to require all employers with 100 or more employees that together employ over 80 million workers to ensure their workforces are fully vaccinated or show a negative test at least once a week.
The president clearly expressing his frustration that 1 out of every 4 Americans who is eligible to be vaccinated still hasn't gotten the shot.
We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us.
Dr. Anthony Fauci says Americans are still getting infected with the virus at 10 times the rate needed to end the pandemic. And the U.S. is headed into the fall with 4 times more patients in hospitals than a year ago. Now, Biden calling for an end to what he calls pandemic politics.
This is not about freedom or personal choice. It's about protecting yourself and those around you.
Some Republican lawmakers and union chiefs immediately pushing back against the new mandates, calling the president's actions unconstitutional. Some states are also already considering legal action. Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, tweeting, quote, "My legal team is standing by, ready to file our lawsuit the minute Joe Biden files his unconstitutional rule. This gross example of federal intrusion will not stand." And Arizona Governor Doug Ducey tweeted out, quote, "This is exactly the kind of big government overreach we have tried so hard to prevent in Arizona. This will never stand up in court." Just last December, then President-elect Biden said he would not demand the vaccine be mandatory. The White House now saying the president's position has needed to change, along with the virus.
So obviously, information, data evolves, and the steps we need to take to address, to get the virus under control, to help people return to normal, has to evolve as well.
The president is also calling for regular COVID testing at all schools. The Los Angeles Board of Education taking things one step further, voting on Thursday to require all students over the age of 12 to be vaccinated if they want to attend in-person classes. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Well, our CBN News medical reporter, Lori Johnson, is standing by here to tell us more about this. So, Lori, the first question I've got, how in the world are these mandates going to be enforced?
Well, that's a great question, Gordon, because anyone who's driven on an interstate knows that if people don't want to obey a rule, they won't unless it's enforced. And at this point, it looks like OSHA is going to be enforcing this. And they say that they're going to be fining businesses $14,000 per offense. And so we'll see if that actually holds.
I've got to ask, as an employer of over 100 people, is that 14,000? What does per offense mean? Is that per employee who is unvaccinated? How do they count offenses?
That's what it sounds like. And the details of this were not laid out in the president's speech. And so there are a lot of questions, and a lot of employers, such as yourself, are consulting their legal teams and getting legal advice, because this is a huge legal issue on so many different levels. Okay, well, who's going to pay for the weekly tests? Within what I've seen in the news media, that you either have to mandate vaccination or require people to submit a weekly test that they're not positive. So who's going to pay for the test? Well, the president did say that businesses must pay for time off for employees who get vaccinated and also pay for time off if that vaccinated employee is having some trouble, doesn't feel very well after their vaccine. Sometimes people need to take a day or 2 or 3 off after the vaccination. And so he made it clear that businesses have to pay for that time off. But it looks like if a person is opting out of the vaccines and is instead going to go the weekly test route, that it is going to be up to the employee to pay for that.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Regeneron. The president is saying that will be made more available. So what is Regeneron? What does it do?
Regeneron is wonderful, and people who are regular viewers of the 700 Club know we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Regeneron is a monoclonal antibody. It is a treatment that is very effective, and it's widely available in some places, like in Florida. And we know that it reduces the risk of hospitalization among COVID-positive patients by 70%. So if you become positive, if you become sick with COVID-19 and you get this Regeneron or another monoclonal antibody treatment, then within about 1, 2, or 3 days of the onset of symptoms, then your chance of being hospitalized drastically decreases. And so the president said that the availability and the manufacturing of Regeneron is going to be increasing. He also said that part of this new effort is going to be increasing the manufacturing and availability of those tests, Gordon.
All right, last question. We're hearing a lot about the Delta variant. There was a Lambda variant, and now I'm hearing that there's a new one called Mu, and so I'm relearning the Greek alphabet.
Sorry.
Tell us about Mu. Should we be concerned about that one?
Well, yes and no. Right now, Mu has been identified in 49 states, but still, Gordon, the Delta variant makes up 99% of all COVID-19 cases, and it's absolutely ravaging our country right now. We're averaging about 150,000 cases a day, 1,500 deaths per day. And so health officials really have their hands full with Delta right now, although they are keeping an eye on Mu to see what it's going to do. Right now, there aren't that many cases. There are some early reports that in laboratories, in Petri dishes, that it is very contagious and could evade the vaccines. But also, we know this is true with Delta, that Delta somewhat evades the vaccines and is extremely contagious. So when people say that Mu could evade the vaccines, they're not saying entirely, but possibly somewhat. So their health officials are definitely keeping an eye on Mu, but much more concerned with Delta at this point.
All right. Well, Lori, thanks. In other news, President Biden faces another huge challenge, getting U.S. allies out of Afghanistan. Mark Martin has the story from the CBN newsroom. Mark?
Thanks, Gordon. Americans are being flown out of Kabul in Afghanistan, but thousands of Afghans who helped the U.S. are still stranded in their homeland, and their predicament poses a problem for the president, who promised not to leave American allies behind. It could be difficult for them to leave, since it may not be possible to get travel documents in Afghanistan, and American diplomats and troops are gone. That's led to fears from U.S. lawmakers, veterans groups, and other Americans that the U.S. might abandon countless Afghan allies. Afghanistan's new government sees its takeover of the country as a victory for Islam, and the Taliban says it's willing to have relations with most other countries except one, Israel. Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell brings us that story.
Israel won't comment on the Taliban statement that it will consider ties with everyone else but the Jewish state. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. would think about ties with the Taliban.
The Taliban says it seeks international legitimacy and international support, and that will depend entirely on what it does, not just on what it says.
Blinken says the Taliban committed to fighting terrorism, not allowing Afghanistan to be a terror launch site, and upholding the basic rights of the Afghan people, including women, girls, and minorities.
They see America as a country which they can blackmail, because Americans do not get it. Americans will cater to the Taliban, unlike Israel.
The European Union says it already broke their word with the installation of a radical government. Longtime Middle East expert Dr. Mordecai Kadar says the group sees its victory as reaching way beyond Afghanistan.
What happened in Kabul on the 15th of August will forever be remembered in the Islamic world as the victory of Islam over Christianity, the victory of the jihad over the war machine of the infidels. It will be the victory of Allah over Jesus.
That's the day Taliban forces seized control of Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. Kadar says the perceived victory has worldwide repercussions.
And they actually will derive so much encouragement from what happened in Kabul that for years it will fuel the jihad against the West in general, against Israel in particular, and the whole Islamic world became so emboldened.
He says it brings back memories of 9/11.
America was hit in the biggest terror attacks which could ever happen.
That was 20 years ago when on 9/11, al-Qaeda terrorists based in Afghanistan killed 3,000 people in one day after hijacking commercial airliners and targeting the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. A fourth plane missed its target but crashed, killing all on board.
And America went to Afghanistan, defeated the Taliban within 2 weeks, got rid of the Al-Qaeda, and lo and behold, 20 years later, the Taliban won. They succeeded to defeat the most powerful global superpower.
Kadar warns that the Islamists will continue to push forward in their battle against Israel, the U.S., and Europe if America doesn't wake up. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
So many stories to cover around the country and around the world. But, Gordon, we definitely cannot forget about what's happening in Afghanistan. Back to you.
I don't think we'll ever forget what's happening in Afghanistan because Afghanistan won't let us. I've been saying for decades now, the 20 years of this war, that we're in a war that's not fought with bullets. This is an ideology, and we never took it on for what it was. And throughout the Bush administration and then the Obama administration, less so in the Trump, but Trump opened the door and started the negotiations with the Taliban, which now the Biden administration has finished. But during all of that, there was all this insistence that Islam is a religion of peace, not understanding at the core fundamental they're trying to outdo each other in terms of who is more adherent to Sharia, who is the true Muslim. And we're seeing that right now play out in Afghanistan, where you have ISIS-K versus the Taliban, and ISIS-K is saying, well, the Taliban, they're not true Muslims. The really true Muslims are the ones who want to give their lives in the struggle and the jihad against the infidels, and we're more than willing to do that. 21 years ago in Afghanistan, under the Taliban, there were training camps put in place. In those training camps, one of them had a U.S. airliner, and they learned how to break in, how to take over. All of these things were done in Afghanistan. And then they exported from Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabian citizens who came here, and we literally trained them in how to fly an airplane. All of that was done, and it's the most horrible attack the world has ever seen, the greatest terror attack of all time, 9/11. That anniversary is tomorrow. The same group that put all that together is now back in power in Afghanistan. And they're absolutely saying this is a victory of Islam. This is a victory over Christianity. This is Allah against Jesus. They're saying that. They're believing that. And it's because we never undertook the ideological battle. A lot of that has to do with, I think, our leadership, particularly in our foreign affairs. Do we even believe the ideals that were founded in America? And I point again to the Bush administration. When they put Sharia law into the constitution of both Iraq and Afghanistan, they were essentially saying you can't have freedom of conscience, you can't have freedom of speech, you can't have freedom of religion. These are foundational principles that our republic and any free democracy has to have. So if you're not going to take on the ideology, we've been fighting the wrong war for 20 years. Now here we are, 20 years later, and once again, the same group that made all of those terror attacks, they're now in control again. Can we anticipate there'll be more terror? I think absolutely. And I think we're already seeing it being an emboldening act for Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. We're seeing prisoners break out of prisons in Israel. There's now yet another day of rage being scheduled in Israel. All of these things are consequences of the pullout from Kabul, the pullout from Afghanistan.